What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about Formula E and efficiency in motorsports, if I have the time, because as, well, pretty much everybody knows, last weekend was the first ever Formula E all-electric car race, because that actually is supposed to mean something, but I was thoroughly unconvinced, to say the least. I'm really quite torn on Formula E. On one hand, I want to like it because I think there is an interesting concept there, and that is, the first all-electric racing series. That's interesting, that's exciting, that's something cool. And as the technology evolves, and it's going to evolve, and it's going to evolve quickly, over the coming years, we're really at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to electric cars. Even if they were done a very, 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 very long time ago, but that's a different story for a different time. The technology is going to evolve. However, at the same time, I can't help but feel that this is too much too soon, too early, to the point where this is actually going to end up harming electric car racing in the long run. Don't get me wrong, the actual racing in a wheel-to-wheel sense was okay. It was nothing spectacular, but it was far from the worst race I've ever watched. However, watching this race, I felt like a person who's not a fan of racing. If you've ever talked to someone who isn't a fan of racing, they'll say, yeah, you're just watching cars go around in a circle. Doesn't matter if you're watching, Formula 1 or NASCAR. It's still cars just going around in a circle. They end up where they started every single time for however many laps on end. That's what I felt like I was watching. And that's something that typically I don't feel. Typically there's an element of strategy. Even when there's a long green flag run in an IndyCar oval race that you saw it several times this year, there's still the strategy element and who's coming, who's going, who's saving their fuel a little bit better and can make an extra lap, and how that's going to pay dividends. Whereas in this race, in the Formula E race, I just never really felt compelled by the strategy. It just didn't really feel all that important, other than you don't go fast because you no longer have battery, which just it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel exciting, and it just feels weird. Plus the fact that because these are really early on electric race cars, they don't have the battery capacity. Plus the fact that they're slow because they don't have the battery capacity, which also necessitates the need to have a circuit that was pretty much crap, to be honest. And I don't say that because it's a street circuit. I understand why there's street circuits, and I think it's a good idea, but at the same time, hey, chicane, 90-degree corner, chicane, 90-degree corner, chicane, 90-degree corner. I understand why they did it. They had to do it the way they did it. You have to have a way to keep the speeds down on the straightaway, because obviously as you go faster and faster and faster, the car produces more drag. That's going to drain the battery faster. Plus you got to have the brake zones for the regenerative braking, that way they can keep the batteries charged up a little bit more. But that alone just kind of made the race feel very meh, and as slow as they were going, honestly, as slow as they were going, I would have expected a lot better racing, to the point where I honestly was thinking, why in the world did they even put wings on these cars? I don't understand it. The speeds that they're going, I would kind of expect a touring car race to unfold, where it's very, very close and there's a little bit of rubbing, a little bit of beating and banging between cars, but of course they're open wheel cars, so that's not gonna happen. It just felt very weird watching this. It felt very weird seeing a car accelerate out of a corner like you expect, but then about halfway down the straightaway just going absolutely nowhere at all. And it's like my brain says these cars should be a lot faster. The fact that they're supposed to be on this cutting edge of technology says they should be a lot faster, but they're not a lot faster at all. In fact, they're a lot slower. And it is just embarrassing to watch, in my opinion. And then there is the issue that everybody was expecting me probably to harp on at the very beginning, because everybody is doing it with Formula E: sound. Ah yes, sound. And this is the real reason I expect Formula E to fail. Because when I look at something like Formula 1, the engines aren't necessarily exciting sounding this year. A lot of people agree that, you know, they're passable. However, an F1 car goes really, really, really fast. That alone makes it exciting. It's the, you know, absolute cutting edge of, you know, how fast can you make a car within a predefined set of rules. That's exciting, that's interesting, that's cool. However, you look at Formula E and you have a car that's quite slow and, well, it sounds like a Formula E car, which I think most of us heard, and if you haven't, I suggest you go play around with one of those $20 RC cars. That's basically what they sounded like. And I say this because all around the world, live events, be it racing, concerts, sporting events, things like that, are having to deal with television. You know, television, internet live coverage. Ticket sales for the events aren't what they once were. You know, for example, you look at NASCAR even. Their ticket sales are down. I'm sure if you look at, you know, sporting events around the world, even outside of racing, you're going to see the same thing. Because I can get better coverage at home. I don't need to go sit out in the grandstands all day when it's 95 degrees out. I don't need to buy a $4, you know, bottle of water at the track. And I get better coverage. But the difference is, I don't get nearly the same experience. You know, when I went to Sebring earlier this year for the 12-hour race, I didn't have a clue where in the world the final caution, final full course yellow in that race was. I didn't know what it was. All I knew, all of a sudden the cars were slowing down. There was no TV jumbotron thing around me. There was no, you know, PA system around me or anything like that. I didn't have a clue. Nobody did. But there was nowhere else in the entire planet I would have rather have been at that moment for the last, you know, 2 hours of that race than standing on the exit of turn 17. You know, being there as close as you can get to the cars and the sounds and the lights and everything. It was a spectacle. It was exciting. It is why you go to a race live. You know, it didn't matter if the race itself was actually any good, because it was just exciting to be there. You know, it's exciting to be at a concert. You know, you can get better quality sound, you know, recorded on a, you know, vinyl record or whatever you want. You know, you can get better sound, better listening experiences. You don't have to be like up in the nosebleed seats, but you're not actually there. Why would I want to go to a Formula E race? Why would I want to go to a Formula E race? That's the question that I find myself asking, and that alone should probably say that there's something wrong. Do I go to a Formula E race because it's the cool, hip, trendy thing to do? Do I go to a Formula E race because it's racing and I'm supposed to like it? Because it's racing automatically? Like, I can't... There's not a Formula E race anywhere around me, so I'm not going to go to a Formula E race. But even if there was a race in my city, what would I want to go to it for? What would it offer? You know, viewing it at the track isn't going to be a spectacular experience when you consider the fact that the cars make no sound, and that's really part of the excitement of racing, whether or not you want to admit it or not. You know, the cars aren't fast enough that when they go by, you're going to get that rush of wind like you do with, you know, a 43 car NASCAR field. You know, when you feel those things go by, you don't just hear them. You know, it's like, what is the purpose? And that's something that Formula E really needs. And I think until it gets it, it's just going to go downhill further and further and further, to the point where I honestly do think that this was a series that was rushed out the door too early, too soon. That's going to end up hurting the reputation of electric car racing, because of the fact that, well, the amount of problems that it has, you know, just from the circuit standpoint and the car standpoint, you know, and that's going to improve. But at the same time, who's going to be there to watch it once it actually finally does improve? You know, and I honestly have to wonder, how in the world do Andretti and Dragon field the team in this series? That's what I want to know. I just have a feeling that the FIA is definitely throwing money at teams to actually make this series somehow work, because I can't figure out a single reason why you'd want to have a Formula E team. But maybe I'm being pessimistic on that front. But yeah, so I want to like it, but I didn't have a reason to like it. Simple as that. If I'm watching electric cars, I want them to be doing scale speeds of over 9,000 miles an hour. And stuff like that. Put some slot car, like, let's make a giant slot car track and let's make them really quick. I don't even care if the drivers are actually out there. Full scale slot car racing, boom, much better than Formula E, instantly guaranteed. Anyways, on to efficiency in racing, because that's kind of a topic that's related, plus the fact that it's kind of a hot topic this year with Formula 1 as well. So recently I've been reading Rush to Glory, which is basically the movie Rush in book form. In that book, the author mentions that the Brabham of that year was terribly fuel inefficient, to the point where, according to the author again, they needed to carry approximately an extra 145 pounds of fuel to complete a race distance, if they actually could make full distance. 145 pounds of dead weight. Yeah, that's a lot. Why? Because their engine was inefficient. Their car was inefficient. And you're not going to win many races carrying around 145 pounds of dead weight. You know, it's all about efficiency. You know, the engineers constantly, you know, in the wind tunnel trying to get as much downforce as they can while not increasing the drag. You know, the engineers in the engine shop trying to squeeze out as much power as they can make with a given unit of fuel. That's what it's always about. Racing in itself is 100% about efficiency. You know, it is all about who can get around the circuit the fastest, otherwise known as the most efficiently. The racing line is the racing line because it is the most efficient way around the circuit. And, you know, some people will say, oh, well, you know, lift and coast and everything like that. It's so wrong. Formula 1 should be full on all the time. Well, like I just mentioned, if you're having to carry around 145 pounds of extra fuel, would it be worth it? You know, let's say that one of the engines happens to be less fuel efficient. Suddenly those teams running those engines need to carry more fuel to go the distance, whereas the other teams can actually take fuel out of the car, and, you know, depending on the way they measure minimum weight, they could run more ballast, which is advantageous. That's why, you know, you've seen a lot of drivers over the years in Formula 1, you know, skinny themselves down to degrees that previously were considered pretty much silly, you know, just in search of more ballast, which means faster lap times. You know, and it is all about that. It is all about the efficiency. And people complain about lift and coast, but again, that is the most efficient way to get around the circuit. And it's something that you're not going to take out of it. You know, you're not going to take out of racing. You look at IndyCar racing, for example. You know, on the road courses, even in a spec car and a spec series, they're pretty much fuel saving right out of the box. They're trying to optimize their lap time while minimizing their fuel use, because that time that they're going to save in the pits is going to pay themselves back versus what they're going to lose out there on track, because you can save a lot of fuel with losing a minimum of lap time. And that's what lift and coast is. It's a way to save fuel while not losing too much lap time. And, you know, I'll transfer this over to sports car racing. It has always been about efficiency over there. You know, there's this car that has attained almost mythical status in the last decade thanks to games like Gran Turismo and Forza. It's a car that honestly was nothing super spectacular in terms of absolute speed, but people now remember it as this car that conquered everything. That car was the Mazda 787B. It wasn't necessarily the fastest car, but it did two things well: reliability, it didn't break, and fuel efficiency. It had good fuel efficiency. And, you know, that's something that you've seen at Le Mans recently with Audi and Peugeot and the diesels. You know, getting as much distance per tank, as much distance per stop as they possibly can, cutting their time that they spend in the pits to the point where they've You know, the ACO has shrunk the fuel tanks of the diesels years upon years upon years, trying to get the things to actually be somewhat fair with the regular petrol cars, you know. They basically built a better mousetrap, and that is what it is all about, and that's the things that should be a good thing about motorsports, you know. And you know, yes, I don't like things like lift and coast. I don't like fuel saving in IndyCar, for example, but at the same time, you can't take those away, and that efficiency is already ingrained anyways, because those engineers are looking for that efficiency to begin with, regardless of whether or not their drivers are taking advantage of it. I mean, yeah, we'd all like to see them doing, you know, 20,000 RPMs, doing 275 miles an hour down the straightaway, you know, and basically turning the cars into the Red Bull X1 from Gran Turismo, but maybe we don't need to go that far. I don't know. That's just my opinion, man. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.